if you've got a cast that comes up to your elbow over here, then you should put your tefillin on where they normally sit in the correct way, and then just wrap the strap around the cast. If you've got a cast that, sometimes people have done things and the cast goes up much further, the person dislocates their shoulder, for example, they can wear a cast that's going to come all the way down like that. At that point, if you can't put your tefillin yad on, so don't put it on. But by not putting it on doesn't mean that you shouldn't put the other one on. Even though they're a pair, you're supposed to wear them both together, but if for whatever the reason you can't, you should just wear one of them. And the opposite is also true, which means that if a person's done something to their head and they can't put their tefillin shel rosh on, they should still put their tefillin shel yad on, right? Because we've got it's a mitzvah to put on as much as you can, right? One, preferably put on both. If you can't, at least to put on one of them. If a person's lost a limb, they've lost their left arm, then they should be putting their tefillin onto their right arm instead. But like I said, somebody's going to have to help get it on. Well, one of the things you may have noticed with tefillin is that we very often, during davening, we very often touch our tefillin. Right, so you'll see that the standard procedure is that you touch the hand tefillin, then you touch the head tefillin, and then you kiss your hands. Right? Where is all of that coming from? So the idea is very simple, that you're always supposed to be in a state of knowing that you're wearing your tefillin. Right? Now, again, for people that haven't been wearing tefillin for a very long time, it's difficult to imagine that that a person doesn't know they're wearing them because they're relatively uncomfortable at the beginning. But once you get used to them, so they become comfortable, and it's possible to go through davening without being constantly aware of the fact that you're wearing your tefillin. So we kiss our tefillin in order to remind ourselves, a physical reminder, right? We have to touch the hand tefillin, we have to touch the head tefillin, and then you want, kiss your hand as well. All of that is being done in order that you should not lose sight of the fact that you're wearing your tefillin. It's something you need to be aware of the whole time whilst you've got them on. So why is that such a big deal? Because there is a halachic opinion. There is a halachic opinion that if a person forgets that they're wearing tefillin, it's called hesach hadat, which means that you're not paying attention anymore really to what you're doing, and you're just going through the motions. So there is an opinion that a person has to make another bracha over his tefillin because he's not been doing the mitzvah properly. Right? So of course the best thing to do is not to get involved in that. The best thing to do is to allow yourself to be aware of wearing your tefillin the whole time, and that's going to come together with the idea of touching them to make sure that you're aware constantly. The interesting halacha about tefillin, you're allowed to borrow somebody's tefillin without asking them. Now normally, when you need to borrow something, you need to ask. That's standard. It's not just standard etiquette, it's standard halacha as well, right? So, somebody wants to borrow your pen, and if they see your pen is lying down on the table over there, they shouldn't assume that they can borrow it and give it back when they're finished, but rather they need to go and find you and ask you whether it's okay. However, with tefillin, it's permissible if you see a pair of tefillin lying on a table somewhere and you need to put tefillin on. You don't have any tefillin with you. It's okay to take the tefillin out and it's okay to put them on. However, not to take them away from the area that you found them in. Right. So, for example, if tefillin are outside somewhere and you want to go into the synagogue and you want to pray in the synagogue, then you should not take those tefillin unless you get permission from the person they belong to. But if the tefillin they're already in the synagogue and you want to put them on, then you can assume that the person is interested in your fulfilling a mitzvah. Right? The person who owns the tefillin, you can assume that he wants you to be able to fulfill that mitzvah, and he'll let you do it. Yeah.
It's the same works with other objects that are used for mitzvah. Like
Interestingly enough, esrog and lulav, the problem on the first day is that it has to be yours. Which means that the person has to give it to you as a gift, even as a gift that you're going to give back immediately afterwards, but it's got to belong to you. On the other days, it's okay to assume that the person is happy for you to be able to do that. It would be the same, for example, with books. Right? If you see somebody like a Jewish book, you see it on somebody's desk over there, and it looks interesting. You can sit down over there and you can start reading it. and you can assume that the person would be happy for you to do that. If it says on the inside, it says, please don't use without permission, so then of course you have to go and get permission from the person. That goes without saying, right? Well, one of the things that I've noticed in the past is that things that go without saying need to be said pretty often, actually, because people don't pay attention to them. Just one thing you need to be wary of, which we spoke about the other day, was that if you borrow somebody else's tefillin, you should be careful to just take note of the way that they sit in the bag. Whether the tefillin shoyad is on the right-hand side or the tefillin shoyad is on the left-hand side, and you should put them back in exactly the same way so that when the person whose tefillin they are comes to use them the next time, he's not going to get confused and take out the wrong tefillin first. Right? The best way of putting on tefillin is that you take out the tefillin shoyad before the tefillin shorosh, you put on the tefillin shoyad, then you deal with the tefillin shorosh. If a person every single day of his life has had his tefillin, tefillin shoyad on the right-hand side, tefillin shorosh on the left-hand side, and then all of a sudden somebody uses the tefillin and puts it back the other way, he's not going to realize that. And the next day he's going to pull out the right-hand tefillin as he always does to find out that it's a tefillin shorosh. So it's like a basic courtesy to the person who you've borrowed the tefillin from, that you should put the tefillin back in the same way that you found them. Because tefillin are so holy, they've got to be kept very carefully. That's one of the reasons why they've got pretty, today, when I was growing up, they weren't like this. But today they've got pretty strong protective boxes that go around them, that go all the way around the tefillin, right? When I was a kid growing up, there were just cardboard boxes that sat on top of the square, the square bit that sits in the middle, and the bit underneath was left unprotected. And it wasn't a great situation, it really wasn't. Nowadays they've got these fancy plastic things, or with hinges, and they've got ventilation, and they've got all kinds of things in there. And the reason for that is that we got to look after our tefillin very well. If tefillin fall on the floor, which can happen, if your tefillin fall on the floor, so if they fall on the floor whilst they're unprotected, when they've been taken out of the box, and the tefillin themselves fall on the floor, then the accepted custom is to fast. Now, you should fast the next day. You can't fast on the same day, because in order to fast properly, according to Jewish law, you need to accept upon yourself the fast the day before. So normally what happens is in the afternoon service, when you come to pray mincha, so you need to accept inside of the Amidah, towards the end, you accept upon yourself, tomorrow I'm going to make a fast. The fast is it should be a dawn to nightfall fast. It's not a 25-hour fast, rather it's just a daytime fast. If the tefillin fall on the floor whilst they're in their protective boxes, or even whilst they're still in the bag altogether, then again the custom is not, you don't have to fast, the custom is to give charity. You can give, as much or as little as you want to give, but it's just, what's the idea? The idea is like this. When things happen, especially things like that, there's some kind of a spiritual dimension attached to it. If somebody drops their tefillin, they need to go through some kind of a rectification process, right? If their tefillin are uncovered, then it's more severe. So the rectification is a little bit more severe. That's why we fast. Fasting is an idea of we're giving up from ourselves, we're sacrificing from ourselves in order to try to, rectify the situation. If the tefillin are in the protective box, so it's not considered to be as severe, nevertheless, some kind of rectification needs to take place, because this happened for a reason. Therefore, if you give charity, you'll be able to take care of the problem. Here's something which is probably, pretty much a pretty good halacha for today, looking at what's going on over here. It's forbidden to eat a meal whilst you're wearing your tefillin. However, it's permissible to eat small amounts and to drink. Now, for most of us, this is not really a big deal, because we come to shul and we put on our tefillin and we pray the morning services, and then we go, put the tefillin away, and we're finished. However, there are certain people who wear their tefillin all day long, or for extended periods of time, right? And let's say, for example, today it's very cold outside, and you want to carry on wearing your tefillin after you finish praying in the morning, and you want to study some Torah whilst you're wearing your tefillin. But you want to have a nice hot drink or something, so that would be okay to do. You want to have a snack, that would be okay to do. But to sit down and have a meal, that's something which you shouldn't do whilst you're wearing tefillin. Again, why is that? Because food, you may be surprised to hear this, but food has a habit of distracting us from what we're doing, right? And if you're supposed to be constantly aware of the fact that you're wearing your tefillin, and you start eating a proper meal, the chances are that you'll be distracted from the fact that you're wearing your tefillin, and you'll be concentrating on the food instead. Yeah.
So when a person wears it all day, are they supposed to be constantly aware even when they're not praying?
Yeah.
The whole time?
Yeah. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Right.
Right? And you know, I don't recommend, you know, you could start doing it a little bit and then maybe extend the time that you keep your tefillin on for. But in general, you know, we tend to get absorbed in what we're doing, and at that point it becomes a little bit of a problem. But there are, like I said, there are people, again, there are people who are really, people who are involved in Torah learning all day long. So for them it's a little bit easier than, I go mention the other day.
Studying Torah and like thinking about concepts deeply, you might also forget that you're wearing.
Yeah, it's true. Which means I think you've got it's an interesting balance, no? Which means that obviously you want to concentrate as deeply as you can, whilst you're trying to understand the Torah thoughts that that you're trying to learn. But on the other hand, you do have to be aware of the fact that you're wearing a tefillin. So I don't know how you do that exactly. I don't do that. So you'll be surprised to hear. To try and find somebody who does and ask them how they manage, huh? See how they do it.
So you just do tefillin once a day at any time? It doesn't have to be
like we spoke about yesterday, the mitzvah for tefillin is all day long. Right? Why do we put on tefillin in the morning? Simply because we spend the most amount of time in the synagogue praying in the morning, which means it's like we're already directing ourselves into the spiritual realms, right? So let's put on tefillin then, and it will enhance the prayers, and it will allow me to remain in my tefillin for longer than if I was going to put them on, for example, for mincha. Mincha is a much shorter service, right?
So does the amount of time that you have the tefillin on change the mitzvah is still there, but you just gain a larger spiritual?
I think so, which means like this. So when you fulfill the mitzvah by putting on the tefillin and making the brachot, which means that you could do that and then you could take them off again. You see, for example, you see, people in the streets that are trying to get people to put tefillin on. They don't ask them to pray the morning services. They just tell them, here, put them on, make a blessing, perhaps recite the Shema, and then take off the tefillin, and the next person comes along and puts them on, right? Which means that the mitzvah of tefillin is to make the brachot and to put the tefillin on. Are you getting more reward the longer you wear your tefillin for if you're wearing them in the right way? Yeah. Which means you're extending the mitzvah by keeping them on for longer. But that doesn't mean that you have to do so, right? In order to fulfill the mitzvah, you just have to put them on. So, for example, somebody wasn't able to put his tefillin on in the morning, and he's not going to put his tefillin on in the afternoon service either, but he wants to put them on before it gets dark. So, he gets home and just puts them on, makes the brachot, recites the Shema, and take them off, finished. You've fulfilled your obligation. Okay, what do you do if you're not feeling well? Again, part of the problem over here is that with tefillin, you've got to be aware of the fact that you're wearing them the whole time, right? Now, if a person's not feeling well and they're not going to be able to concentrate on what they're doing, then if they're really not feeling well, they shouldn't put on the tefillin. If it's just like you're feeling a little under the weather, but you can put your tefillin on, you know perfectly well that you're wearing them, then that's okay. That's not a problem. But sometimes people are so caught up in not feeling well that they're not concentrating on anything else. At that point, it's a problem to put on tefillin. However, hopefully at some point during the day, if he feels well enough to be able to do it, then he should fulfill the mitzvah then, and put them on and make the brachas. Just here in Israel, especially people that come to Israel at the beginning, sometimes it messes up their stomachs. I don't know. I say a few people are, nodding over here with, it's an experience. Whatever. It's a different cuisine over here, and Especially if you're going to go out and eat shawarma, which is, you know, some kind of unidentifiable something that's been revolving around for hours and hours and hours, in the hope that the you know, that the germs have been burnt off by the, you know, who knows, right? But some people end up with stomach aches. If a person has diarrhea, then it's a problem to put on tefillin. Right. That's an interesting halacha, which I think we spoke about at some point in the past. But you know, there's a blessing you're supposed to say when you come out of the bathroom. It's a very beautiful blessing. We're thanking God that our bodies work the way that they're supposed to work. But if a person has diarrhea, which means that they know that they've come out of the bathroom, but they know they're going to have to go back in very soon, right? Because their stomach's not functioning properly, then they should not be making a blessing each time they come out, because they haven't really finished. And with tefillin, if a person has diarrhea, a person should not put on tefillin, right? Because you're supposed to be putting on tefillin. You're not supposed to put on tefillin when you need to go to the bathroom. A person who has diarrhea, even if they're not in the bathroom right now, is pretty much in a constant state of needing to go to the bathroom, and that means that a person would be exempt from having to wear them. When do you start? At what age do you start wearing tefillin? So everybody here knows, of course, you become bar mitzvah. So the obligation begins when you become bar mitzvah. And there are plenty of people where the custom is to start wearing tefillin the day you become bar mitzvah, unless it's Shabbat or Yom Tov. The day you become bar mitzvah, you put on your tefillin. However, because wearing tefillin is something which takes a little bit of practice, right? There are many people that have the custom to have their children put on tefillin earlier. So, for example, in my house, the custom is that was a custom that I had when I was a kid, and the custom that my children have had as well, is that a month before their bar mitzvah, they start putting on their tefillin. They get used to how to put them on, they get used to saying the brachot, they get used to putting them into the right place, so that when they get to their bar mitzvah day, they're now ready to start wearing tefillin, and it will be natural. They'll be able to do it without having to be, you know, unsure of exactly what they're doing. In other communities, especially in the Yemenite community, they start putting on tefillin much, much earlier. Right? Sometimes even a few years before the bar mitzvah. It's to do with when the child is old enough to recognize and understand the importance and the sanctity of tefillin, then at that point, in the Yemenite community, they're happy for the child to start wearing tefillin. The child could be 11 years old, sometimes 12 years old, but you know, they'll be putting on tefillin way before. Whatever you do, it's going to be okay. Mitzvah Hashem, when you get married and you have your children, and you'll have boys, if you have boys and they're going to have their bar mitzvah, whether you have them put on their tefillin, you know, a month before, whether you haven't put on tefillin the day of, whether you haven't put on tefillin even months and months before, it's fine. Whatever you do, it's absolutely fine and acceptable. Okay, just an interesting thing over here about the parchment that's being used, right? That the different paragraphs are being written upon. There are basically two different kinds of parchment that are available. One of them is very smooth. One of them is a little bit hairy. Interestingly enough, even though you would have thought it would be the other way around, the slightly hairy parchment is a better quality. And even though you would have thought that the smoother it is, the better the quality is, but when it comes to writing with ink on parchment, it's not true. The reason for that is because when you're using the ink has to be able to sit on the parchment. The letters have to retain their shape, and that's easier done with the slightly hairy, right? With a slightly hairy parchment. If you go to a shop that sells these things, you'll see easily the difference between them. And of course, it's a little bit more difficult to write on the parchment that's a little bit hairy, which is why it takes a little bit more expertise, because it's easy for the ink to spread out a little bit. So you've got to be careful. The ink itself is also something which has to be made specifically for writing, not just tefillin, but writing Sifrei Torah and mezuzahs and Megillot, anything that requires what's called a sofer, a scribe. It's normally made up of something called gallnuts and gum and copper sulfate. And interestingly enough, the straps also have to be coated with the same thing, with the same concoction, which means that even though sometimes the straps have got a quite a like a shiny sheen to them. Nevertheless, it's all using the same thing over here. And nowadays you can buy little touch-up kits for your tefillin, right? Because part of the problem over here is that tefillin, because the black color is being painted onto the straps and onto the leather boxes themselves, so sometimes they become, they get scratched away, they become worn away a little bit, and you need to, in the olden days, you had to take that off to a sofa, to a qualified person to have them repaired. Nowadays, you can buy two different kinds of touch-ups. One of them comes in a white-out pot, right? It's just it happens to have the black ink that's used for the tefillin, and it comes in exactly the same way. It comes with a little, the top, and you pull it out. It's got a little sponge on the end, and you can touch up the little pieces that needed to be touched up and turn them black again. The other kind that's available is like a felt tip. Is that what you call them in America? Yes? Felt tips?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I was just hoping to get a reaction of some kind. A pen,
Yeah.
right? But like a thick one, right?
Yeah.
So you can buy them now. You can buy those as well, and they also got the ink inside of them. They're used to touch up the tefillin. The end looks exactly the same as a regular felt tip. The only thing you need to do before you start touching up your tefillin, before you start painting over the bits that need to be painted over, you should say that this is being done right in Kedushas tefillin, that you're doing this in order to sanctify the tefillin. You're not just painting them for no reason, but your kavana, your intent is that you are coming to repair them and turn them into how they need to be. There's an interesting thing with regards to the boxes that the tefillin go into, that the leather boxes that the tefillin go into. There are two different kinds of leather that are available. One is something called dakot, and one is called gasot. Dakot means thin, and gasot means thick. Now, you need to know that if you're working with dakot are very fragile, and if they get a little bang, they'll become not kosher, and they'll have to be taken either to be fixed or to be replaced. Which means that if a person's coming to buy tefillin now, it is better to spend a little bit more money and to buy gasot, which is coming from thicker leather, because thicker leather tefillin, even sometimes when the corners, if they get bashed in, right, a sofa who knows what he's doing, somebody who works with leather who knows what he's doing, is able to push them out from the inside. They can push them out again and make the corner again. With the thinner leather, the minute the thing gets bashed in, then that's it. You're stuffed, and you have to go and you'll probably have to get a new buy it altogether, which is an additional expense. Even though it costs more money to buy the gasot, the thick ones, it's better to spend the money now rather than at some point have to keep replacing the thin leather tefillin that you've got. Again, when I was a kid, there wasn't very much that the machinery used for molding the tefillin was relatively primitive, and it was a little bit. It's difficult to work with thick leather. Thick leather's not very supple, right? And to get it into the right shape and to get it into the right corners and to make sure that everything the way that it needs to be was something which was a little bit difficult to do. And in my day, gasot, the thicker tefillin, were much more expensive than the dakot. Today, Baruch Hashem, the machinery that's available to be able to mold and to shape leather is much stronger than it used to be. It's also much more accurate than it used to be as well. And that means that the cost of these things have come down considerably. And like I said, if anybody's considering buying a pair of tefillin, it definitely would be the correct thing to spend extra money and to buy the thicker leather rather than the thinner one, because the thinner one is just going to end up being, a problem. You're going to be worried about it the whole time, and the slightest knock is going to make it not usable. If anybody here has beautiful handwriting?
No.
Well, okay. thinking if anybody here was like a budding sofer, wanted to become a scribe, so you need to know that when you come to write tefillin, before you begin the process of writing, after you've chosen your parchment and you've got your quills ready to get going, you need to announce that you're writing these things in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, which means that everything that's being done in order to make tefillin it's going to be announced beforehand that it's being done in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin. That's how important the mitzvah is, that you've got to be aware of what you're doing, which means even when you come to take the leather and you want to start molding it and turning it into tefillin themselves, it's being done l'shem mitzvahs tefillin, right, in the name of the mitzvah of tefillin. When the scribe sits down and wants to start writing the tefillin, he has to announce that it is l'shem mitzvahs tefillin. He's doing it in the name of the mitzvah of tefillin. And even, like I mentioned before, when you want to come and touch up a little bit your tefillin and fill in, some scratches or where a little bit of the color is worn away, before you do that, you should also announce that it's being done l'shem mitzvahs tefillin, in the name of the mitzvah of tefillin. Again, just another halacha over here with regards to a sofer, with regards to a scribe, that when he comes to write tefillin, he should write the parchments of the tefillin shel rosh, the head tefillin, before he writes the tefillin shel yad, before he writes the hand tefillin. How does it work? So in the tefillin shel rosh, you've got 4 different compartments with 4 different paragraphs that are going to be written on them, and what you'll see is if you ever see the parchments, you'll see they're very long and very thin. And the reason for that is because they're being written on 4 lines. Right? You can only have a maximum of 4 lines on the parchment, which means that the lines are very long, but it shouldn't be taller than 4 lines high. The Tefillin shel yad, on the other hand, have got a slightly different makeup, even though it's exactly the same paragraphs that are being written in the Tefillin shel yad on the hand tefillin as the head tefillin. However, they're all going onto one piece of parchment, and each paragraph should be 7 lines. So you're going to have something which is going to be much more square. Each paragraph will be a much squarer shape than the Tefillin shel rosh, because the Tefillin shel rosh is only 4 lines, so it can be nice and long like that. And the Tefillin shel yad, each paragraph is going to be 7 lines, and it's going to be a much more square shape to it. There's a concept called sirtut, which means that on the parchment itself, before you get going, before you start writing, you should score lines into the parchment. Right? Again, you're doing it with something very sharp. Normally, if you take a look, the sofrim have got all different kinds of utensils that they use. One of them is normally a scalpel. A scalpel is there in order to draw the line across the parchment so that you've got straight lines and you've got equal lines, so that each paragraph is exactly the same shape as the other one. Interestingly enough, when you come to write the letters on the parchment, the letters touch the line on the top. Not the way that we write. When you're writing on something which is lined, we normally have the bottom of the letter sits on the line. Right? When you come to write Sifrei Torah, when you come to write Mezuzot and Tefillin and Megillot, the top of the letter touches the line, and then the letter drops down. It doesn't touch the bottom line, it just stays, it's attached to the top line over there. And I once heard a very beautiful idea behind that, which is that the letters come from the Shemayim, they come from the heavens. And that's symbolized by the idea that they're attached to the line on the top and they drop down, they come down to us here into the physical world. My chavrusa once told me a very nice idea. The vowels, in the Hebrew, you don't have vowels like you have in English. In English, the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U, which are 5 of the letters. But in Hebrew, the vowels are the dots and the lines that appear. Most of the dots and the lines that appear under the letter. The function of the vowels is to allow us here in the physical world to say the word properly, which means it's got a more physical dimension, which is why the majority of the vowels appear at the bottom of the letter and not on the top, because it's drawing the pronunciation down into the physical world as well. Yeah.
So why don't we do that when we're writing, for example, modern Hebrew? Why don't we use the top line since you have the vowels?
You know what? I don't know. Where did it? I mean, I would imagine that it simply came from the fact that it seems to be standard procedure around the world that people use. But people that write horizontally, they tend to write with the writing on the bottom. Why in Hebrew do they? I don't know.
It makes more sense from the top. Like I took modern Hebrew 2 years ago at school, and like you always have that problem with the vowels.
Where do you put your vowels underneath it? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It would make more sense.
I don't know. Interesting question. I really don't have a clue actually. Maybe you should start a revolution. Get people out in, get them out in the streets burning tires, and we're not moving from here until we can attach the writing to the top of the line and not the bottom. See what happens, huh? When the scribe is writing the tefillin, so he should not make any mistakes whatsoever, right? Which means that when he writes tefillin, he should write with something in front of him that he's copying. He shouldn't be doing this from memory, even though an experienced sofer, an experienced scribe, should be able to write these things, off by heart, because he's doing all day long. That's what he's doing, right? Nevertheless, he should have a text in front of him in order to be able to copy word for word what it is that he's writing on the tefillin. What do you do if a mistake has been made? So in most cases, it's possible to rectify the mistake by scraping away I'd say a person spells a word wrong, misses out a letter, or adds an extra letter in. If that's the case, then it's possible to scrape away the ink and to make the correction. If a whole word has been missed out by mistake, it's a little bit more complicated because you've got to now squeeze it into a space which is not very big. That's why the tefillin are given to, after they've been written, they're given over to somebody to go through. And nowadays they're normally they're normally sent through a computer as well. They're scanned by a computer to make sure that they're okay. Most people use both methods because it is possible that computers can miss something, and it is possible that the human eye can miss something. So, it requires both to make sure that they're doing okay. If the sofer makes a mistake writing the name of God, that's a problem. And then it means that the whole thing has to be put into what's called the geniza. It needs to be stored away. It can't be used. You've got to go back to the beginning and start all over again. With tefillin, it's not the end of the world, because tefillin, however, it's not terribly long, especially the tefillin shorosh. Each one is its own paragraph. As Sefer Torah, that's a little bit of a problem, right? The Sifrei Torah come in sections. Depending on how big the piece of parchment is, depends on how many rows, how many columns you're able to write over there. It's not a great idea to make a mistake with the name of God at the end of having finished up a whole section in the Sefer Torah, because if you do, then it's got to be taken out, it's got to be replaced, and that's a lot of work already. Right? Some of these sections can have 5 columns, 7 columns. Again, it just depends on the kind of parchment that you're using. Where's the leather come from in order to make tefillin? So it comes from a kosher animal. It doesn't have to come from an animal that was slaughtered and that went through the process of shechita. It can come from an animal that died a natural death. Right? But it has to come from a kosher animal, which means you can't start off a new fad of ostrich tefillin, because ostrich is not kosher. So you can't use its tefillin. You make tefillin from cows, from goats. You can make from deer, right? Kosher animals. There was a person who was a vegetarian, who was very unhappy. Vegetarians. Some vegetarians don't like using leather at all. It's not just that they don't eat animal products, but they don't like to use leather. They won't wear leather shoes, and they won't wear leather belts. And he was very unhappy about the idea of tefillin being made from leather. But when I explained to him that it's okay, I mean, again, I think it's a little bit more complicated to find the leather, but it's okay to get leather from an animal that died of natural causes, or even an animal that was put down by a vet because it was in terrible pain or something. He was happy to go find himself tefillin, go find himself leather that could be turned into tefillin. Right? I sent him off to a person who makes tefillin in Meir Sharim to find out how much leather he needs. Again, I don't know how, I've got no idea when you go and buy leather, right? Where, what do? You buy it by the meter? I've got no idea, by the foot. I mean, literally by the foot, I guess. I really have no idea how a person buys leather. Right? So I sent him off to somebody over here in Meir Sharim to find out how much leather he needs, and then he went looking to see if he could find somebody who could supply him with leather from an animal that hadn't been slaughtered. Truth, I can't remember whether he did or whether he succeeded or not, but
sounds like a business idea.
I don't know. I don't think there are enough around to make this a viable opportunity. But you know what? If you want to look into it, then we can discuss afterwards.
All right, let's discuss
feasibility. Right? There are some tefillin are made up. The best tefillin to buy are tefillin that are made up of one piece of leather. However, there are some places where you'll find tefillin. You'll see this you'll see it according to the price of whatever you're buying. There are no chokhmas over here. There's no magic, which means that the more the tefillin cost, so I don't want to use the word the more kosher they are, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right? The more tefillin cost, as a rule, the more kosher they are, or the greater is the salesperson's realization that you don't know a thing about tefillin and he can palm you off with something cheap and tell you that it's expensive. It's also a possibility, right? I don't know. But as a rule, you get the batim, the houses, the black boxes themselves, I mean, they can range in price. They can range from, $200 to over $1,000. Right? What's the difference in the prices? What are you getting over here? So the basic difference in the prices is to do with the quality of the leather. It's to do with the manufacturing process, whether it was being made, each one was being made as a one-off, whether it was going through some kind of a factory process. I mean, there are all different kinds of things over here to factor in as to why tefillin might be more expensive, why they might be less expensive. And one of the things that I'd mentioned before is this idea that tefillin might be, if they're made from dakot, if they're thin, then for sure they're going to be a lot cheaper. And if they're made up of different bits of leather that have been glued together, then they're also going to be cheaper. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not kosher. They are kosher. It just means that you're getting tefillin which are of a lesser quality than if you would have got from somewhere else. Okay, the manufacturing process itself for making the tefillin have to be completely square. It's the same for the tefillin shel yad and the tefillin shel rosh. They've got to be completely square. Both the box that they're sitting on the bottom and the box itself that the parchments are sitting inside. And this is absolutely exact, which means that even a 0.5 millimeter out could cause the tefillin not to be kosher anymore. Which means you've got to be very careful with these things, right? You've got to take a good long look to make sure that what you've got over there is something which to your eye you can see. You can see when something is square, right? And take a good long look to make sure that that's what it is. Why is there such a big deal made about all of this? It's just a pair of tefillin. Why do we have to be so concerned about the fact that they've got to be absolutely square and 0.5 millimeter out is going to make them no good? Well, because we're talking about things of the most incredible spiritual, they are incredibly delicate spiritually, and they've got to be exact in spiritual terms. There was a famous email that did the rounds many years ago about a person who he wrote to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, this is the second time that I've written to you. You didn't answer me the first time. I want to know why Judaism has to be so, caught up on the details. Why is it always so absolutely, down to the last millimeter? Why does it have to be like that? And the rabbi writes back and he says, but I did write back to you. He said, and I answered your question to begin with. He says, but I see that in the original answer that I sent back to you, I sent it off to, whatever this person is called, at yahoo.com. And I missed out the little dot in between the yahoo and the com. And I guess it didn't get to you. And then he says, really, like, how important can that little dot be? It's really not such a big deal. It's just a tiny little thing, right? And who would have imagined that because of the lack of one little dot, my beautiful email couldn't get to you? So it's interesting, right? In the I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember that when they made the changeover from 1999 to 2000, there was something called the 2000 bug. There was programming that was done when computers first came into being, programming that was done that nobody took into account that the year was going to change over, and it was going to become a new millennium, right? So from 1999 to 2000, by not putting in one line of code, they were able to save themselves thousands upon thousands of hours worth of work in the original coding. Right? It was just one little line. But we're talking about binary, right? Zeros and ones. It's like one little line of nothing, right? Interestingly enough, though, as we got closer and closer to 2000, the year 2000, the crossover, December the 31st to January 1st, from 1999 to 2000, the whole world was going bananas, because they were scared everything was going to come crashing to a halt, and. It was a fascinating little lesson. First of all, I think in doing things properly, right? But aside from that, the best thing of all was that all these the original programmers that did the work, that had been out of work for a while already because nobody used that system anymore, and they were too old-fashioned to be able to start learning new programming systems, and they hadn't had work for a while. All of a sudden, they were being brought back as expert programmers, being paid fortunes of money to put that one line of code, to put it back into the original thing in order to make the crossover into the year 2000. Again, you people probably don't remember this very clearly, but people were scared that the banking system was going to come crashing down. The internet was going to crash because it wouldn't be able to take the transition. It was great.
Even the Federal Reserve Bank, I think in America,
they shut things down or something?
No, they gave more liquidity to the system, the way I read it.
Oh, yeah?
So even at that level.
What did they do? I just remember now the detail. What was the detail? Instead of writing 19...
It was 99 instead of 99.
It was just all the years in the programming were just the last two digits, right? So it was 98, 99, and they were scared that when it would go to 00, that the system wouldn't recognize the fact that you've gone into the year 2000, and it would assume you've gone back.
Not for all computers, just think Microsoft.
It was a huge infrastructure. Everybody was going mad at the time. It was a real insight into the delicacy of all of this. But I've got a brother who's a surgeon. I mean, if you want to, a millimeter here or there is the difference between life and death, right? In lots of things that we do, it's absolutely fundamental. It really is. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to Judaism, it's like all of a sudden is why are we being so picky over here? Why are we being so exact over here? Why are we being so detailed? Well, it's really no different. When we're making tefillin, what are you doing? You're putting in the programming that's going to allow you to open up communication with God that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise, right? So if it's not done properly, if it's off by a millimeter, if you've missed out on two digits inside of your code, then the whole thing's not going to work properly. Yeah.
So what did they do years and years and years ago before they had precise measuring things?
it was a, it was a, you know, I mentioned it a couple of, I can't remember what it was, but a little while ago, my grandfather used to say that when he was growing up, the tefillin, the houses, the button, the black boxes, he said they were pretty substandard. First of all, they were nearly all made from dakot, from thin leather, and you know, they tried to make them as exact as they could. So they had like metal frames that they would, once the leather had been kind of formed, they would push it up into the leather frame in order to try to get it to keep that shape, and then, you know, keep it there for a little while. I don't remember how long, but maybe even a few weeks, you know, and then take the frame off, right? But it was you know, sometimes these things had to be done over and over again until they became right. It's not an easy thing to do. It really wasn't. In the old days, it really wasn't an easy thing to do. And my grandfather used to say that the parchment with the writing on it, like the cloth, he said was normally beautiful because the scribes were, you know, tremendous Yirei Shamayim. They were very, very righteous people, and they wrote beautifully. And the boxes that they went into were pretty bad. He says, and as you know, as time went on, he noticed that it's a bit like there was like a switch. The boxes became better and better and better, and the standard of the writing was not the same as it used to be.
Who was the first person to wear tefillin?
Good question. Nobody is mentioned in the Bible. In the 5 books of Moses, nobody is mentioned over there as wearing tefillin. But in the oral tradition, in the Talmud, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was given the mitzvah of tefillin by God on Har Sinai, and presumably everybody would from then on wore tefillin. Right? So even though it doesn't say anywhere that Moshe Rabbeinu wore tefillin, but he must have worn them. Right? I mean, there are archaeologically there are some very, very, very early pairs of tefillin that are found. The Gemara talks about how did the high priest, you know, the high priest had a whole series of clothing that he wore. One of them was a gold band that went across his forehead, and he had a hat that sat on top of it. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud about where did the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, where did he put his tefillin shalosh? Did he wear them? Didn't he wear them? If he did, where did they go exactly? Right, which means that they've been around for a long time. That's for sure, and I certainly recommend wearing them. I think it's a great idea. Okay, I think we're going to stop over here in Mitzvah Hashem.